I guess the plan of attack is, okay, we got to beat Mahomes in this division. What's the best way to attack Mahomes? Find our stud. That's what Sean Payton's doing. Or pressure the quarterback. That's what the Raiders are doing. What do you believe in more? I put more trust in Sean Payton. I put more trust in getting the quarterback. It doesn't mean you're going to get someone as good as Herbert or even in the same atmosphere as Mahomes, but you've got to try. Your answer is Gardner Minshew. That's a bad answer. That's a failing grade as far as I'm
Yeah.
concerned. So I'm really down on the Raiders. I don't like their offseason. There's reasons that the Broncos have some upside. I think our guest Cody was maybe a little bit too high on them, but let's not forget that this was nearly a 500 team last year, sitting 8-9 with all the turmoil going on. Now, was Russ worth that much? Where you get rid of him and then now we downgrade them that much to 5.5 wins? I know Justin Simmons, they cut him to save, I believe it was $14 million, but are they going to step back that much? It was an awful start for the Broncos. They start 1-5. It looked like the defense was going to be all time bad. However, we should take a look and say, as noisy as everything was in that building, they knew it was ending at the end of the year with Russ. They recovered after 1-5. They end up going 7-4 in their next 11 games, and I would commend Sean Payton a little bit. Like he steadied the ship, and it's always been about year two. It felt like, okay, look, Sean, we want to pay you, we love you, we're going to give you all the money. You just got to deal with Russ for 1 year. Believe it or not, we will eat $85 million if it's not working. So it's like, fine, I'll do it. I'll deal with it. It's not working, guys. Okay, we made this promise. He's out the door. He handpicks his guy in Bo Nix. Is it going to work? That's the big question. But what they did from the outset is Sean Payton, if you follow the moves, what do you do? Let's fix the line. Everything he did, whether you're talking about draft, mostly in free agency, they made moves to fix the offensive line. It feels like he fixed the offensive line, then he went and got the quarterback. I respect that. It's not what a lot of teams do where the line's a disaster. They don't have any offensive weapons. Let's just get the quarterback and they'll fix everything. That's not what they did. It took a year, said, okay, let's beef up this offensive line. That's exactly what they did. And he went and got the quarterback. And the 20-1 for rookie of the year is fascinating because this guy could very well start day one. The biggest number I see is 15-1 for McCarthy. So let's go. If we go by the biggest, McCarthy 15, Nick's 20. McCarthy should not be shorter because it doesn't look like McCarthy's going to start the season. So, but that's going to change. Like if you're looking and saying, okay, McCarthy's going to start on the bench for Darnold, but Nick's is going to start the season week one. I don't know that you want to make a bet on it, but the number's wrong. Nick should be shorter than McCarthy. And then there are some position players that are also shorter than Nick's. Malik Neighbors. Possibility of a New York bump if he has a good year. So that's there. And then Harrison, we've known him for years now. We've been waiting for this moment. Are regarded as the best receiver, the first receiver taken, and he's in a pretty good situation. Like a lot of times when you get a receiver taken in the top 5, they're going to be with a bad quarterback. And yeah, some people will say that about Kyler, but when healthy, he's at least competent, and he's going to step in day one. He's going to be the wide receiver number 1. So you can make a case. My question is, what about the numbers? This is going to be a run-based offense, and that's where I come up with some concerns, that it's probably going to be more about the numbers, and you have multiple starting quarterbacks that are going to be starting week 1. Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, and maybe Bo Nix is the third guy. I think May sits, and that's why he's sitting there at about 20, 25-1 behind Bo Nix. I would not make the bet, but just being a week 1 starter, if he is, he's going to have a chance because we know injuries always happen. Half the starting quarterbacks went down at some point this year? So there's always going to be that path. And that seems like good value. If he's one of 3 quarterbacks starting from week 1 and you can get him around 20-1, that's not a bad shot compared to Caleb, who's 2-1.
I think Bo, there is interesting value at 18-1, certainly with Sean Payton being his head coach, and the fact that he does have his college wide receiver there with him, too, and Troy Franklin, and they had some success at Oregon. You have Cortland Sutton there as well. So as we were talking, Denver's offense is interesting. That O-line, I think, is pretty underrated as well.
Oh, yeah.
The defense could be a question mark, but Peyton is building that team. Joe, in New Orleans, I think when people think of Sean Payton and Drew Brees and that Saints offense, they think about all the numbers they put up through the air, and they think about Colston and Jimmy Graham and all these receivers and Mike Thomas. But when the Saints were right, they were running the ball, man. I mean, they were a really good running team, whether it was Pierre Thomas or Alvin Kamara. Reggie Bush had his moments, too. They could run, and that's what he wants to do. Obviously, now that he's coaching a team that's outdoors and you're playing in bad weather, especially when you can get to November and December, Bo Nix could help him as a young quarterback. And the big thing with him coming out of Oregon is how efficient he was, how great his completion percentage was at 18-1. So I think he could be a look. Troy Franklin, who I mentioned, is 80-1 to win Offensive Rookie of the Year. I don't know if he's worth a bet, and I don't know if I'd play it. But look, I mean, I guess the one case you could make for Troy Franklin is he this year's Puka? I mean, that's what we're going to say now, Joe, right? Is now that Puka has kind of set the bar of you can find steal receivers in these late rounds, is do we have one of those guys this year? And Franklin's going to have an opportunity to step in and be that number 2 receiver like Puka was. Sean McVay was a great offensive mind. Obviously, Sean Payton's a great offensive mind. But obviously, Puka had Stafford, and, Troy Franklin's got Bo Nix. So that's the drop-off, and that's what's tough. I don't know if I'd bet it, but seeing Franklin 80-1, I mean, if he's the receiver that just comes out of nowhere, maybe that could be worth a long shot as well. The bet that I thought was interesting, though, the Broncos to win all 6 of their division games is 500-1. 500-1? You wouldn't even take a little shot at that? I mean, we both agree the Raiders are going to be
twice. They're beating the Chiefs twice.
What if Mahomes gets hurt? I mean, the Raiders, they can beat twice. The Chargers, year 1 under Harbaugh. Herbert is an injury-prone guy. He could be out maybe a game or two. Maybe they catch him, on a wrong way. The Chiefs are obviously the tough thing. But, I mean, they beat them last year at home. And they always play Kansas City tough. I know they had a losing streak where they... there's a reason it's 500-1. There's a reason it's 500-1. I'm not saying I would throw a crazy amount of cash on it, but I'm just saying sick. I mean, to win 6 division games at 500-1, I think they're a worse bet. I mean, would you rather bet the Wizards to win the NBA title next year, Joe, or would you bet the Broncos to win 6 division games? Probably bet the Broncos. So,
do you know how many teams in the NFL went 6-0 in their division games last year?
I'm going to go with none, maybe 1.
0. 2 years ago,
just to play devil's advocate, the Chiefs are the last game of the season. That could be a layup for them.
Okay,
so they really just have to go 5-0.
Good.
Could be sitting.
Good point.
Sitting everyone. But if you go 6-0 in your division, you're probably in the running for the division, and the game probably
that's
means
true
something.
Too. Never mind, the Chiefs don't have a bye that week.
Yes. Yeah, that's the other part. Okay, this is a bet I've never thought of. Maybe we can use it elsewhere, but
sure.
So 22, I said San Francisco was the team. 21, there was one team. It was Dallas. So it feels like there's one team a year that does this. 2020,
right.
We had the Bills go 6-0. Oh, and New Orleans. Ugh, they went 6-0. But most times, so it ends up being on average about one over the last handful of years. But this is not the team I'll do it with, PJ. That's what I'm saying.
Right.
I still think, I know a lot of the betting lines have the Broncos at 5.5 wins. I mean, I would,
Mm-hmm.
to be honest with you, I'm going to take the over on that. I don't know if it's going to be more than 7.5. I don't know if it's going to be more than 8.5, but I do think they're going to win more than 5 games this upcoming season. I think the bigger question here, when we look at where Denver is at, is can they find a way to take a step forward? Even though that they've made some big changes and they have a lot of young guys, as you mentioned, in terms of developing, a lot of those young guys that you mentioned, like Troy Franklin, Audric Estime, a lot of these guys aren't going to be in line, more than likely, in my opinion, to get a ton of playing time as rookies this upcoming season. Estime might be the exception, but he's been out of OTAs and minicamp. He had a knee scope procedure. He's expected to be ready for the start of training camp in July. Troy Franklin's kind of been buried under the depth chart a little bit, and it's not like he hasn't been producing or making plays. It's just you've got Cortland Sutton, who's now back in the mix. Tim Patrick is back and fully healthy and is looking good at OTAs. You have Marvin Mims, who's going to have a more featured role offensively at wide receiver. And then you signed Josh Reynolds, who was the most consistent player that we saw so far in OTAs and minicamp. That wide receiver room has a lot of guys there that I think are going to get a lot more looks early on. Troy can maybe ascend a little bit as the season goes, but I mean, a lot of these young guys aren't necessarily going to be in a position to play right away, which is going to be a very interesting factor to follow.
Cody, let's talk about that schedule. So you like the over 5.5 wins with this roster. It's a tough start. 3 of the first 4 games on the road, including opening at Seattle, one of the toughest places to play. And assuming he's healthy, week 4, that little stretch closes out at Aaron Rodgers and the Jets. Middle of the season, there's 3 road games in 4-week stretch, including back-to-back at Baltimore, at Kansas City, an impossible spot. And then you close the season against what could be, honestly, they could be the top 2 seeds in the AFC, in Cincinnati and Kansas City. So where are these spots where you think, okay, Denver has an advantage? If things go right, this is why I have them getting to at least 6 wins.
Yeah, I think so much. You mentioned that early stretch. I mean, 7 of the first 12 games of the season before the bye are going to be road games. That's a tough gauntlet. That's a tough test. And Sean Payton had even told us during the offseason, one thing he was looking at was consulting with the 49ers, consulting with the Rams, saying, you guys have had to travel quite a bit in your schedule. You've had to play in a lot of the early games, trying to say, like, what is it that you do differently that allows you guys to go out there and play a little bit more freely? I mean, it's a dynamic. The Broncos have historically struggled on Eastern time zone games. And you mentioned that one game, I think, what is it, week 9 and week 10, if I'm not mistaken, it's Baltimore and Kansas City. Like, that's a gauntlet right there. And then you mentioned, obviously, the final 2 games of the season. You play Joe Burrow in Cincinnati in December. That's a tough thing. Joe Burrow, if he is healthy and the Bengals are there, that's always a tough team in the month of December. And then you have the Chiefs, which everyone expects to still be at the top of the division. I still expect that for them this upcoming season. That may be a game where, hey, maybe Patrick Mahomes and the starters don't even play in that game, right? And that gives you a little bit of a better opportunity. I think Denver can beat Seattle, and I think there are a lot of questions there. I think the Broncos, obviously, they haven't beaten the Raiders in a handful of years. This could be the year that they do that. They've obviously swept the season series against the Chargers last year, though the dynamic of Jim Harbaugh now being brought into the mix for them makes things a little bit more interesting. I think that's going to be a far more disciplined team defensively than what we have seen in the last couple of years. And I think offensively, they're going to have a little bit of a different dynamic. But the idea is for how can you showcase what Justin Herbert does best, and how do you get the ball to playmakers around him? Obviously, I think there's a question mark after they moved on from Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, but I do think that Denver can beat and win some of these divisional games. I think that there's a chance that Denver could beat Kansas City in one of these games. So much of it, though, is hard to gauge because who's going to be the starting quarterback week 1? Is it going to be Jarrett Stidham? Is it going to be Bo Nix? We don't have the answer to that question just yet, but I do think that if this team can stay healthy early on, there's going to be a chance there, but you got to become road warriors, which the Broncos have struggled with in recent memory.